A majority of our viewers not subscribed. Please subscribe to support us and stay tuned for more captivating chronicles. I had always considered myself a bit of an awkward guy when it came to romantic relationships. I hadn't been very successful with dating before I met my fiancée, Kathy. But from the moment I met her, something changed. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and I fell head over heels in love within the first minute of our conversation. It was an entirely new experience for me, and I just knew she was the one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Inexplicably, it seemed that Kathy felt the same way about me. Our connection was so strong that we were discussing our future together within days. We talked about having children and moving in together. And I couldn't have been happier. Those early days were filled with the kind of happiness and excitement I had never felt before. However, things took a troubling turn when I stumbled upon a message on her phone that raised suspicions. It was a fleeting glimpse, but it was enough to make me pause and question what was happening. That night, while Kathy was asleep, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut, so I decided to go through her phone. I'm quite comfortable with technology, given that I make a living through mobile apps I've developed. Although I didn't find anything that definitively proved she was having an affair, I discovered a series of red flags that left me deeply concerned. There were deleted messages, which was suspicious in itself, and a Snapchat contact with an icon indicating extensive interaction, something I hadn't known about before. To make matters worse, I stumbled upon pictures of a guy the first didn't recognize. As my suspicions grew, I became increasingly desperate for answers. In my quest to uncover the truth, I made the difficult decision to install spyware on her phone, hoping it would provide the clarity I so desperately needed. This marked a significant breach of trust in our relationship, but I felt compelled to understand what was happening and why someone I loved so deeply would accept my marriage proposal while being involved with someone else. The next day, as Kathy was set to embark on a 5-day business trip, a common occurrence in her sales job, the messages between her and her affair partner intensified. I was devastated, and the shock was so overwhelming that I vomited several times. It was incredibly difficult to come to terms with what I was reading. For a long time, I refused to fully accept the implications of the messages, clinging to the hope that it was some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. However, as the days went by, my obsession with uncovering the truth deepened. I couldn't resist going through everything I could access. What I discovered was that their affair had started over 2 months before I proposed to her. Her affair partner was a colleague at her workplace, a man 10 years her senior, married with 3 children, and his wife was 7 months pregnant at that point. It felt like the final blow when I overheard them in a hotel room passionately professing their love for each other and talking about running away to start a new life together. I was utterly distraught and overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. I couldn't muster the courage to call and confront her. In the end, I reached out to my best friend since childhood, whom I'll refer to as G. G had grown up in a Brazilian household and was tough as nails even before he and his mother moved in next door when I was 12, back when we were living in the UK. Despite not knowing a word of English initially, we quickly became close friends over that first summer. We learned each other's languages, with me picking up some Portuguese and him learning some English. Our bond became incredibly strong, perhaps forged through the shared trauma of our respective childhoods. Since then, we've been inseparable, which is quite ironic, because I'm the shy, awkward nerd while K is the outgoing, fearless type. I confided in G, sharing every detail, showing him the incriminating messages and emails that had torn my world apart. As we entered her parents' house, the atmosphere was filled with warmth and familiarity. Kathy was seated on the sofa flanked by her parents, and she couldn't help but notice that something seemed off with me. I could sense her gaze on me, her concern evident, but I continued to maintain my facade, attributing my apparent discomfort to not feeling well. Beside me, G, my lifelong friend, wore a congenial smile and took the opportunity to reassure Kathy that I had prepared a fantastic surprise for her at her parents' house. His enthusiastic encouragement was a cover for the storm of emotions brewing within me. I remained steadfastly silent, determined to shield my inner turmoil from Kathy's watchful eyes. As the day unfolded, we engaged in polite conversation and shared laughter with her parents. I couldn't help but feel a hang of guilt as I interacted with them. Kathy's parents had always been exceptionally kind to me, treating me like one of their own and making me feel cherished within their family. This only deepened my inner conflict as I grappled with the life-altering revelation I was about to share. Amid the pleasant chatter and familial affection, someone eventually broached the topic of the big surprise that she had mentioned earlier. The anticipation in the room was palpable, and G gestured for me to take the floor. Gathering my thoughts, I began to express my heartfelt gratitude for Kathy's parents. I spoke about how fond I had grown of them, emphasizing the importance of their welcoming embrace and the warmth with which they had always treated me. It was a sincere testament to their generosity and the pivotal role they had played in my life. Little did Kathy and her parents know that beneath this facade of gratitude and celebration, I was harboring a devastating secret, one that would shatter the world they knew and forever alter the course of our lives. My voice quivered, and I choked up for several minutes. I had meticulously planned an eloquent and composed speech, but the emotional turmoil within me caused me to forget every word. Frustrated by my own vulnerability, I blurted out the painful truth that had been consuming me. I revealed that Cash had been involved in an affair with a coworker who had a wife that was 7 months pregnant, shattering the engagement, canceling the wedding, and bringing our relationship to a screeching halt. The silence that followed my confession was almost suffocating. It was as though time had come to a standstill. I placed the key to the storage container, which held Kathy's belongings, on the floor. And without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving everyone in the room in a state of shocked disbelief. As I exited the house, G followed closely behind me, offering support in his own unique way. He assured me that I had done the right thing, that standing up for myself was a crucial step towards healing, and that someday, I would look back on this moment and find strength in my decision. However, in that moment, none of it felt good or real. I was still reeling from the whirlwind of emotions that had overtaken me. The next phase of this surreal ordeal involved a confrontation with the affair partner's wife. I didn't even bother with introductions. I just blurted out everything. I'm pretty sure she slapped me in the midst of my frantic confession. I handed her a thumb drive containing all the evidence. Her husband suddenly appeared behind her, and his wife immediately started screaming, ordering him to stay away. He attempted to make excuses, but before he could take a step forward, G was right up in his face. G firmly told him, "You heard the lady, get out." After some more back and forth, the affair partner eventually packed a bag and slinked away. She stayed behind to talk to his wife while I was left to grapple with the chaos that had become my life. In the end, we were invited into G's mother's house, where we agreed to spend the night. The affair partner's wife was afraid her husband might return and didn't want to be alone. I still felt invisible, like no one saw me or acknowledged my presence. I sat there silently crying, understanding that her situation was far more complex than mine because I wasn't married and didn't have children. As time passed, they all fell asleep while I remained in the same place, tears still streaming down my face. That night, I reached a breaking point. I decided I couldn't endure this any longer, and I began searching for pills, but I couldn't find any. I just couldn't wrap my head around what was happening. It wasn't until her father arrived at 5:30 in the morning that the situation began to change. I opened the door to let him in, and he calmly asked me some questions and inquired about my well-being. Then he went inside to find his daughter while I stood there holding the door. Shortly after that, G came out to talk to me, and my world was forever altered. After I stared at G for a moment, everything went black, and I passed out. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the hospital. 3 months had passed since that fateful night. G had stayed with me during the initial weeks after I returned home because he was genuinely concerned that I might try to harm myself again. During this time, I made some significant changes in my life. I hadn't spoken to my ex-fiancé since the traumatic night. I took the step of changing my phone number and blocking her email address as well as all access on social media. Nevertheless, she persisted coming to my door countless times, talking through the door, sometimes for as long as 4 hours. She repeatedly expressed her remorse and begged for forgiveness. She shared that she had ended the affair with her partner and that the partner's wife had initiated divorce proceedings. To make matters worse for her, she claimed to have been fired from her job because the partner's wife reported their affair to her. The situation was fraught with turmoil and consequences, but I had made a conscious decision to distance myself from it all. I made the decision to try talking to her parents in hopes of getting her to stop coming to my door. I didn't really care about her reasons or what she wanted anymore. I had come to realize that my perception of her and who she actually was in real life were two very different things. All I wanted was to remove her from my life so I could move on. Before I could approach her parents, her dad unexpectedly showed up at my door one day with a 6-pack of my favorite beer. He asked if we could talk and I agreed, suggesting we could walk and talk instead of inviting him inside. I didn't want him to see the mess my apartment had become, and I definitely didn't want to risk his daughter suddenly showing up at my door. He opened 2 bottles of beer and he began to speak. Initially, he apologized on behalf of his daughter. Then he opened up about the pressure he and his wife had faced from their daughter to approach me and somehow facilitate a conversation between us. He admitted that his daughter was spoiled and selfish, and he hoped that she would finally have to face the full consequences of her actions. Perhaps he believed that this experience could ultimately lead her to become a better person. I asked him if there were any problems between us, and he assured me there were none. He even made a light-hearted comment suggesting that maybe it was time for me to get a divorce. Apparently, the confrontation between him, his wife, and his daughter didn't go well after their initial visit to my door. However, this time, he conveyed his determination not to back down. It seemed like a fight that had been brewing for a long time on his end. G has been a constant source of support and encouragement throughout this challenging journey, as he always is. His unwavering presence has helped me navigate the aftermath of a tumultuous period in my life. Now that I've emerged from it, I've come to realize just how right he was. He had always believed that someday I would feel proud of standing up for myself, a feat I rarely attempted in the past. And now I do feel proud of what I've done. I stood up for myself, something I usually never did, and it feels empowering. I'm even determined to do it again in the future when necessary. Despite my resolve to distance myself from my ex-fiancée, she persisted in showing up at my door. This time, however, I chose to engage with her. She begged me to let her in so we could talk. And surprisingly, I agreed. I set the condition that we would meet at a local park in half an hour. I didn't want her inside my chaotic living space, fearing that she might make accusations or escalate the situation. Strangely, I wasn't nervous about our meeting. I felt strangely composed and even somewhat positive. When I arrived at the park, I found her there, tears streaming down her face. We engaged in some meaningless small talk at first. She attempted to pry into what her father and I had discussed, but I firmly told her it was a private matter between him and me, none of her business. As her tirade continued for what felt like hours, I couldn't help but feel detached from her. It was an unusual sensation because I had never felt that distant from anyone before. Eventually, I decided to call her dad to come and pick her up. I informed her that I forgave her, not because I wanted to rekindle our relationship, but because I no longer wanted to carry the burden of anger, hatred, and hurt. Getting back together was simply out of the question. I made it clear that people who truly love each other don't engage in the actions she had taken against me, and trust once broken is challenging to rebuild. She cried hysterically, and I watched without much emotional involvement. In the end, I expressed that she would seek counseling and work on fixing whatever was broken inside her. It was a moment of closure, one that marked the beginning of my journey towards healing and moving forward. After our conversation at the park, I decided to call an Uber and head to the local animal shelter. There, I adopted a kitten and gave it the name Shiny. G made a light-hearted comment about being blinded by my new shiny spine, referring to my newfound courage and assertiveness. Shiny was a constant reminder for me to stand up for myself, a symbol of the positive changes I was making in my life. I was proud of how I had handled the situation with my ex-fiancé. Instead of resorting to anger, yelling or name-calling, I had chosen the high road. It was a testament to my growth and newfound strength. I focused on moving forward, enjoying the company of my amazing kitten, and finding joy in the simple pleasures of life. Later, G was planning to come over to play some video games and share some beers. It was a welcome distract, the chance to have fun with a good friend. Despite the mixed emotions I felt about my ex, there was an underlying sense of relief that I was finally moving past this chapter in my life. I would cherish the good times we had, but I was also looking forward to a future free from the turmoil and uncertainty that had marked this difficult period. It was what it was, and now I was ready to embrace what lay ahead. Dear listener, if you have reached this far, please consider subscribing our channel, as it helps and motivates us to continue our work.